Today we all are here assembled for the session Super App Aggregating Services and Data. We have our esteemed panelists with us for the session who will be sharing insightful information about the industry. First, I would like to welcome Mr. Manish Memani, founder and CEO of Protect.ai. Mr. Harshad Mengle, Head Security Operations at the Aditya Birla Group. Mr. Hilal Lone, CISO, Razorpay. And to moderate this session, I would extend warm welcome to Mr. Prashant Chaudhary, Partner Technology Consulting at Ernst & Young's. Over to you, Prashant, sir. Thank you.
Hi. Good afternoon, and am I audible? Super. So how was the lunch? So it's always a task to moderate a session which is immediately after the lunch, but I promise I'll do my best. So the topic is super apps and how do we ensure cybersecurity and other compliances when we are getting into the super apps business. What we'll do is we'll keep the session interactive, and of course, we have a great lineup of panelists, speakers over here. But what I'll do is I'll actually pivot to a slightly more interesting and interactive format. So because we have a smaller audience, I'll request if all of you can come forward, and we'll keep it a lot interactive with the audience as well. So that way, I think we'll get the best out of the 45 minutes which we have. So I know a lot of us have been backbenchers, including me. But if we can do some exception today. Super. So we'll get going. So I think as we get into the session, maybe I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves in terms of what they do very briefly, and also their take on super apps and why super apps. I mean, it's just so easy to go from one app to the other app. So why suddenly this concept of super app is coming? Any which ways there was so much more to do in the world, but why super apps? We'll start with Hilal.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Manish. So I think, just introduce myself. My name is Hilal, and I am the CISO for Razorpay. Before Razorpay, I used to be the CISO for Dream11 here in Mumbai. So regarding super apps, I think is the aspiration of all the apps that we have in the market right now. They obviously want to give a seamless experience to their users, right? So they want to make sure that once a user actually has logged onto your app, they do not basically leave the app for any other experiences, right? So they want to basically give them the ecosystem, the services, basically they want to make sure that the user actually gets everything in one place, right? And there's an harmonious, basically, way of doing those things. And it's like, the analogy is like very simple, right? So you go to a supermarket, and in the supermarket, you see multiple different, basically like a showcase of different shops and everything, right? So you literally get everything there. So the user does not have to basically go out of that supermarket to go somewhere else, right? Same thing is basically applicable to basically super apps. So in the super app, it's like basically a supermarket for digital services, right? So you get basically like retail content over there, you get payments, you get banking service, you get whatever, like there's everything basically available for you to basically explore and experience. So I think that's the reason basically that we have super apps right now. And of course, like one of the other reasons for us to have super apps is to basically make it seamless for the companies to operate themselves as well. So there is an additional benefit for companies to basically make sure that their operational overhead actually remains like constant and does not actually explode into something that they cannot manage. So it's an easy way for them to basically manage their application and services as well. Yeah.
So Harshad, I'll jump to you straight. So normally, when the whole digital space started, see, the companies were known for a specific thing. Uber, if you need an app, car, taxi, you go to Uber, right? Or for example, if you have to do a payments, you just go to a Paytm. So you come from Aditya Budla Group, huge diversified group. What's the business prerogative to get into, super apps and then complicate the whole thing?
Yeah. So first of all, I would like to thank you, DHCI, for inviting me here. There is a correction required. I am not a CISO of Aditya Birla Group. I am more of a head of security operations. Now, when it comes to super apps, so I have good amount of experience designing part of the design phase of super app, where payment, your retail, B2B, so all channels of super app, I have seen it during my development process. Now, when it comes to, as Prashant rightly mentioned, when it comes to super app, I think my fellow panelist also mentioned what exactly super app is. The most important, aspect of super app we need to think is basically from a security standpoint is you're actually, opening the attack surface, because now with super app you have many other challenges to deal with. Now you have customer facing super apps, employee facing super app. But when it comes to customer facing, how you are actually managing the data, how you are actually doing the encryption. Any change which is happening, DevSecOps we talk about, is it opening any sort of a vulnerabilities risk? All these are basically we need to think through. So in my opinion, when it talks about secure apps, I would rather put it in this way that, this is like microservice. There's one app which is calling a lot of micro apps. And when it comes into super app, it is nothing but a platform. Now, when it comes to platform, I think one important thing is we need to think more from how we can actually secure this platform from multiple threats. So you need to do risk modeling, first of all. You need to have a proper designing, because there are three ways to look at the super app. One is basically you have a web services, you can have hybrid platforms under your super app, or you can have a native platform. So what exactly your strategy is, that plays the important role. And there I think, in my opinion, security plays the important role. So if you're thinking of hybrid, you need to think how you're going to call APIs. So those APIs should be secured. Now how you can make those APIs secured, there are multiple ways to look at it. Authentication especially, what kind of authentication mechanism you are using, how you are actually building this security, how you are maintaining the privacy information, because most of the time this also captures a lot of privacy related data. And especially these super apps are on mobile, how you are ensuring the jailbreaking, that is also equally important. I'll just share one of my experience where actually one of the HR company has developed a app which has multiple things for employees, which also talks about time management. Like, if you are in that building premise, you just need to punch in your time. It will automatically, from a geolocation, it will automatically take your time, okay, and then it will sign you in, okay. But there are ways to, spoof these kind of apps. You use fake GPS, okay. If you are using fake GPS, if you are sitting at home, actually you can put a location of your office, and you can actually fool your applications. So I think these are some of the things which you need to think of whenever you are developing any app. So that is possible when you are doing a jailbreaking, right? So your devices should be, they should have a detection of jailbreaking. So these are few things which, I thought, I will just share so that we can be, more risk aware.
Yeah, no, very insightful. Thank you for that. So Manish, Protect AI, you're in the business of protecting mobile phones. What is your take, specifically, let's talk in general on mobile application security, and more so, what is the incremental thing, risk which comes in when we're talking about security of super apps?
Quickly introducing myself, I'm Manish Memani. I'm the founder for Protect.ai, India's first and only mobile threat defense company. We do mobile app and device security. Coming to the point, very interesting. We have done a lot of research into mobile application security side. if you see the kind of landscape changing once we call digital transformation, we believe that this is all about mobile transformation actually. On an average, an Indian is spending 5.5 hours daily on mobile applications. And that is where, the concept of super apps has started emerging. Because while we spend more and more time on the smartphone, we are also looking for a lot of experience, lot of ease. We would not like to switch from one app to another all the time. And that is how the super apps are coming up. But once it comes to security, very interesting research, as I said, we have seen that 95% of the financial apps, okay, or the super apps can be easily reverse engineered. And there is primarily, two reasons that from the development perspective, I will build these applications, whether it's on the Android and iOS platform. We are using the same team to build this security layer as well. And that is how the gaps start happening. We have seen Harsh talked about, jailbreak or routed detection. We are seeing, companies started implementing all these controls, but it is so easy to bypass these controls. Now, who can bypass? India is again a 98% Android market. Android operating system by nature is having some vulnerability. I'll not call it extremely vulnerable, but yes, as compared to iOS. Different operating system, different devices, different OEMs, they are trying to, make their own set of versions of Android ecosystem, and then thus bringing, different type of risk back to the ecosystem. While companies build super apps or financial applications, which are highly, a lot of transactions happen, they are technically, running on a device which is not owned by them. Okay? Millions of customers bring millions of devices, and we do not know what is the state of those devices. The same millions of devices are connected to, millions of network, and we do not know what is the state of that network. Collectively, from the endpoint of these millions devices, million network, the kind of risk which is being transferred to the super apps is humongous. Okay? You talked about, just location permission, proxy location, right? Very commonly seen in Indian market, especially for HR systems, HR apps. During the time of COVID, some companies build HR apps to mark attendance and are automatically capturing the location. People just do mock location and then mark the attendance. That's a fraud. What, as a security, we believe is today, super apps require runtime security. Okay? Once I say runtime, which means your app is running on any kind of device, okay, any kind of operating system, it should protect itself on runtime basis. Okay? So device policy enforcement is required today, especially for super apps, which has millions of users. Similarly, network policy enforcement is required. And then we need to ensure as a company that while we are building the super apps, people should not be able to tamper or reverse engineer or do any kind of fraudulent practice with the application side. Yeah? So that is what I collectively call as the runtime security required for building super apps or any other critical sensitive financial applications or retail applications as well.
Very interesting, and especially the point that bulk of the India runs on Android. And specifically, I think broadly, if you look at it, mobile security for an end user itself is a big question mark. And on top of that, if you build an app, it's always vulnerable. And then if you make a super app, it just becomes like, really a big crown jewel on your app. And the other thing is you compromise one app on one user, then you can just replicate the whole model. And it just brings the whole reputation down, and also there's a question on business viability. So coming back, I think it's very clear that the more apps we aggregate under the umbrella or the name of super app, the bigger is the risk which is coming in. But I'm not hearing full spectrum of risks which is coming out. So maybe I'll be really interested in hearing from the audience what will be the top 4 or 5 types of risk which you would think will come in if somebody is trying to use or deploy super app at scale for, let's say, millions of users. Anybody wants to take a shot? Yeah, go for it.
privacy-related risks where the super app may have permissions to track the user's location or uh, profile the usage of other apps. So this could be one of the issues.
Privacy related. Anybody else?
So I'm from the payment ecosystem like Mr. Hilal, so I could say the supply chain risk that comes with having a super app. So there are various APIs that you talk to in merchants, gateways with your banks. So and they have their own components and they have their own libraries. So yeah, that's I think one of the biggest risks that I see.
Yeah, so basically when you operate a super
If you could introduce yourself very quickly and then.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Darshit. I basically head security research at CloudSec. Yeah, and I am experienced in handling threat actors, understanding their methodologies and all that, right? So based on what we have seen on forums and all those discussions, any super app that you bring in, right? So very recently we had seen a Turkey-based super app in which they offered you virtual cards. Okay, now if you ask me, that's a very good feature for the clients or for the end users, that you can use virtual cards, your payments cannot be tracked and all that, and you can do payments and do multiple things using the super app. But threat actors use these virtual cards in order to purchase Google advertisements, Facebook advertisements, and started spreading malware over that. So I think that perspective of what features are you offering on your super app and how easy or how convenient are you making it for a cyber criminal, I think that perspective has to be brought in. Like those kind of risks has to be thought through so that your app is not becoming a HubSpot or hotspot for a cyber criminal.
Understand. So cybercrime and maybe fraud is also an extended risk.
Correct.
I didn't hear anybody speaking about regulatory risk. Okay, super. So maybe now, it's so easy being a moderator. So now I'll ask the panelists their view on regulatory risk, privacy risk, supply chain risk, and also the fraud risk, and not to forget the APIs. In terms of, what is your view as experts in terms of, how these risks are materializing, and, what are some of the best practices which companies are adopting when they're deploying super apps?
Okay. Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you so much for highlighting the risks, right? So I think, when I think of the risk spectrum, that actually is very specific to super apps, right? I think there are we broadly classify in 3 different categories, right? So one is basically the operational risk for the super apps. Second one is basically the technical risk of the apps, and the third one is basically the regulatory risk that you talk about. So in terms of basically say, okay, in terms of technical risk, you have multiple different things. My friend here was just talking about basically the inherent risk in the platform itself, and the technical basically risks in the basically that you have to have a contextual awareness of the application. You need to have runtime awareness of the application to make sure that application has a very airtight security, right? The technical security on top of that, so because it's so tightly knit that you probably would want to basically have the isolation at the data layer. You want to basically have isolation at the basically the functional layer and the API layers and all that, right? And those risks are basically not going to be as simple, right? So because you have a super app that actually has basically communicating apps like smaller apps that actually communicate with each other. They have services which talk to each other. So you want to make sure that the contamination does not happen, and you want to make sure that you maintain a certain level of data sanctity and basically make sure that the authorization and the access management is as tightly managed as possible, right? Then the operational risk side of that, basically, for example, you just talked about basically the supply chain, right? So you have so much basically complexity in terms of basically managing your vendors, your partners, your third-party basically software, which might be open source, which might be commercial, all of those, right? So when you actually think of those, what happens is that it brings in a lot of complexity which you otherwise, you anyway were not actually like scaling to that level where you would actually think that you have control over your supply chain, right? But when it's a super app, in super app you have so many, it actually grows exponentially, because not all of these applications will be native. They will be like, there will be some inherent risks, there will be some basically heterogeneous participation of different service layers with each other, right? So which means that you are introducing a lot more exponential risk than you otherwise would have in a singular application, right? So supply chain obviously becomes like that operational risk that you have to basically figure that out, right? Apart from that, I think that in terms of the operational risk, you also need to want to basically make sure that you need to have the internal, basically the communication that happens between the service layers is as secure as possible, right? So you don't want somebody to basically sniff communication that happens between the service layer, right? So there could be potential for basically pivoting and all those things. You want to basically make sure that that does not happen. So apart from that, which is the final risk type that we have, the regulatory risk, which actually deals with the data security, data privacy that we talked about, and all of that, right? So which it's not just about compliance, basically being compliant. It's also basically making sure that we have some sort of governance that makes it easy for us to manage the security of individual apps. And when you bundle them into a super app, you need to make sure that not only do the individual components have their own security layer, but as an app super, as an overall, you want to have make sure that you have governance on the super app as well. So meaning that like I go back to that analogy that I gave before about supermarket, right? So in the supermarket, you have individual shops. Those individual shops will have their own security, right? So I don't see a shop that does not have its own security, right? So, but at the same time, the supermarket itself has its own security as well. So you have like multiple layers of security. So which means that you have to have like a very concrete plan about and a good framework of data security and data privacy that's what basically acts and works at the individual layer as well as at the unified layer as well. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. So you're sounding like a lot of apps is super apps. And then if I have to extend it, you're saying security and a lot of security, you need a super security or a super app. Interesting. So Harshad, I'll pivot to you. You're ex-RBI. You had been also an auditor with you had been in the audit function in one of the largest banks in India, a lot of global exposure. So what's your take specifically on regulatory and privacy risk when it comes to super apps? Because there is one view, it's coming from most of the regulators. I can cite Europe. I think it was with Amazon or some other super app where the challenge which the regulator has is that the app owner will collect the data and the consent for one specific business transaction with the user, and then somehow they just use that data for mining, analytics, and other purpose to position, sell, cross-sell other services and other offerings. And then the question comes in that, see the consent and usage of data as per GDPR and so many other norms, including the one which is coming in India, is always specific to a transaction, specific to there has to be a right legal basis for them to be the data collector and to be the data processor. But I don't see that conversation happening as much in India as it's happening in other locations. So what's your take? What are you seeing?
So there are two parts of your question. One is actually you answered it, okay, as far as GDPR is concerned. But in my opinion, there are important things which we need to understand is basically there is in Europe, they have something called PSD2. It's a Payment Services Directive, which is a second version, which talks about how you need to handle all transactions from start till end and how this security should be provided, right from identities, authentication. See, whatever risk we today discussed, they are all common, right? I mean, for IT, for super apps, they are all same, right? For apps also, they are all same, right? But if you look at the super app, what we are using is basically AIML. If you know, AIML is the major core for super apps when you do cross-selling, right? Now, how I am going to ensure that my logic or the algorithms which I am developing only stays with me? Does it not important for me to protect them? That is also one of the important risks, right? We are storing on clouds. These are all some of the risks which, we already discussed. But I think algorithm part is very important. Now, whenever, the compliance comes in, we always follow compliance. But more of a tick in the box. I think that has to come out, and more business-oriented risk assessment or business-oriented compliance has to be part of the system. When I say business-oriented is, somebody rightly mentioned that use case, right? What use case I have, right? According to my use case. Now, if I'm providing payment through my app, I'm providing shopping through my app, maybe retail through my app, I need to ensure that the entire transaction is encrypted. When it is stored in the encrypted format. When it is, the transactions are happening through API, those API keys needs to be protected. So entire encryption channel, end to end has to be there. These are some of the directives which are already there in PSD2. I think similar directives are also there from compliances here. I think regulatory also talks about how the apps should be developed, and these are all part of the current directives as well. So I think more question is more on whether we are doing it, whether we are ensuring that these compliances are followed religiously. That is something which is a question. So in my opinion, rigorous testing should be there, ensuring that your keys cannot be broken, your data which is stored, when we talk about privacy, that has to be stored in an encrypted format. If organization, if the organization using a weaker key, naturally that's an impact, right? That key, weaker key can be exploited, and the entire privacy data, because in any case, when you do cross-selling, you have to take consent. Okay, in privacy policy, we always take consent. Now, when you read those consent form, they clearly mention that your data will be used for cross-functional purpose. And you are authorizing, as a consumer, we are authorizing that cross-functional usage of your privacy data. Now, the important point for customers is basically whether this data is secured. Are they sharing within the group companies or outside? Okay, that is something which is more of a question. And I think most of the organizations, they do not sell this to, they use it for internal cross-selling purpose. So I think, in my opinion, there are definitely rules and regulations around super app. In my opinion, more we need to think of how we can protect the algorithms which we are using over other risks which we discussed.
Yeah, agreed. And a great point. And I think the story on regulation is still evolving in India, and we are all waiting for some regulations to come. Let's see how it unfolds. But two things are coming out. If I have to broadly classify, we are hearing security by design, and we are hearing privacy by design. So maybe, Manish, I'll love to hear about you. That how do you do security by design when you're doing a super app development? And Hilal, I'd love to hear from you. How would we do privacy by design? And audience, let's see what's the subtle difference which comes out in terms of a security by design and privacy by design. Manish?
Yeah, thanks. In fact, I would like to take one more question. Somebody from the back talked about, that the super app should not be a breeding ground for cyber hackers. Okay. So while building this, companies have to be very careful about the kind of threat modeling what they do. Okay. Building mobile applications today, because it is running on your customer device, we do not know what is the state. Earlier, endpoints are defined as laptop, desktops, and it is totally under the control of company, your environment. Okay. But today, your endpoint, because your apps are running on your customer device, that is also technically an endpoint, and you are getting threats from those endpoints. So security by design has become very, very important. We believe in the concept of DevSecOps. Okay. There are technology which are available which you can go and directly integrate into your mobile applications, which provide multi-layered security controls, right from device level threats to network threats to controlling any kind of reverse engineering or tampering of your mobile applications, ensuring all the encryptions are into place. Okay. So while building, we need to ensure as a part of DevSec process itself that we ensure a proper threat modeling is done. All those scenarios are built into the application. And when I say that threats from the cyber perspective, today super apps are also subjected to a lot of frauds. Today you pick up a newspaper and you will only read about money siphon, money gone, identity theft onto the mobile applications, financial super apps. Okay. So threat modeling should be done from cyber perspective, fraud control perspective, compliances perspective, whether it's regulatory, data privacy, RBI, SEBI, IRDA, and there are so many, regulators which talks about data privacy. So a combination of cyber threats, fraud, and regulatory perspective, a proper threat modeling, and building it into the development process itself is security by design. That is how I will call it out. Another thing, while you go live with these kind of sensitive mobile applications, super apps, we should have a very clear visibility of the users. We should be able to understand who is my user, how do I map it, how do I go and identify this user. Okay, it's called unique digital identity for each and every app user. And what is the kind of threat which is coming to my environment? Our telemetrics is also important these days, because we, as a company, sometimes miss to understand what are the kind of threats which is originating from the mobile applications, how it can impact. So a live visibility, a live dashboard, a live telemetrics is also very important while building these kind of super apps.
And if time permits, I'd love to get into authentication across sub-modules of the super app, because some are owned by the same vendor. Sometimes it's a federated model or a aggregator model. But let's hear from Hilal on privacy by design.
Yeah, sure. So there are two ways to do it. One is basically like an academic way of doing it. Then there is the practical way of doing it. So the academic way of doing it is basically like, okay, you know what your data is, you know what our applications are, you know who your users are, and you know what the use of your data is. Then implement one of the stringent and the most strict possible access control on that, and you achieved privacy by design. For example, you implement mandatory access control on your applications, and you achieve privacy by design. But that's not how actually things work, right? So basically, you obviously have people who want the data to be useful for them, right? So in order for them to achieve that usefulness and to make sure that the data is basically being properly basically used for the cohorting or whatever they want to use it for. So you have to have basically a very proper plan on basically implementing privacy by design. So to start that, you obviously use basically a privacy impact analysis that you do. You want to make sure that, okay, what is the possible way somebody could potentially basically like break the privacy of a system, or who could potentially basically gain from basically getting access to information that he's not supposed to basically get information, right? So you want to make sure that you also map those particular use cases where access to information is basically like granted on a per use cases or on a blanket basis or whatever the policy may actually permit. So you want to do that analysis, that privacy impact analysis, to make sure that you identify your users, you identify your data, you identify your systems. Once you have done your privacy impact analysis, then you want to say, okay, what am I actually going to basically gain from it? Am I actually doing it for regulatory purpose? Or am I actually doing it for basically some business goal? Am I actually doing it for basically like making my customers happy? What exactly is the goal? So I think the ultimate goal of all privacy by design is to make sure that nobody who is not authorized to basically some information is able to see that information or manipulate it for some reason. So in order to do that, you want to make sure that you start from the very beginning, right? So at the data acquisition point of view, right? So information acquisition point of view. So you want to make sure that the users are informed about the uses basically for which you are basically getting the data from them. So you want to make sure that you properly basically educate users on basically how their information is going to be processed, utilized, and deleted, right? So you need to have planned for that. So second thing, basically, once you acquire the data, you want to make sure that, okay, how you are going to basically grant access to that data, how you are going to store that data, where you are going to store that data. A lot of basically regulatory requirements are going to basically like, they are going to demand that you have a geofencing, that you have a data isolation, or you have a system a segregation and all that, right? So you want to make sure that you actually have that in your plan. And when you're building your application, that has to be by design, right? Meaning that it has to basically start in the code itself. So that when you're actually granting that access to the data to the, for the users or known as for cohorting, you want to make sure that that's not actually breaking any kind of privacy rules. And in order for basically us to have like a proper visibility into privacy, like you want to make sure that you have proper monitoring systems in place to make sure that, okay, whatever privacy breach may happen, you are aware of that, so that you can actually minimize the damage from the basically, and that only comes when you have enabled basically proper logging, proper audit trails, and basically want to make sure that there is some kind of alerting that's actually set up on that data in case you want to make sure that that actually gets basically embedded within the application. So I think those are some of the ways through which we can actually embed privacy in an application.
And very well articulated.
Prashant, just I have one point to make here. So I think, in practical sense, what happens is business comes to you and, they will say that, this is an app we have developed, make it secure, right? So I think both my panelists have already mentioned. So I think, what, we need to take a stand. Okay, we need to take a stand stating that, whenever you are taking any new initiative, because this is shadow IT, right? Whenever you are business taking new initiative, security should be part of the foundation. Unless we are part of that foundation, we will not be able to succeed in developing the secure app. That's something which I think, just to summarize, is a need of our. I think most of the businesses, they do not understand, and many of them, they have already, failed developing the secure app. And I think that's how I see this privacy
So
and
Harshad,
security
let's take
by
an
design.
audience poll on this. So how many of you think that security by design and even privacy by design, the teams in cyber or privacy are included at the design phase itself? Okay, there's one brave warrior. Yeah. There's just one person who's saying in the audience that cyber guys are involved at the conception stage itself. As EY, we run a global survey every year, and I actually help in doing the India customized version for that. And the results are nearly the same. That while everybody in the board realizes security by design, privacy by design, but to Hilal's point, there's a theoretical way of doing it, and then there's a practical way of doing it. And in the practical way of doing it, security, privacy, even today, unfortunately, becomes an afterthought. And what happens is, if you're doing a sensitive business or a critical business like Super App, because there it's just, there you're thriving on, or your business model is having millions of users, if not billions. And one glitch actually brings the whole castle down. So can't emphasize more on what Arshad, you and Hilal and Manish mentioned. Any questions? We got a minute or so left. Even comments are welcome. I think there are quite a senior guys in the audience. I think there's a mic coming your way.
Mr. Hilal, this is a question perhaps just a little more on what you said, right? So privacy by design, you mentioned that you follow the data essentially to identify perhaps what would be the best way to maintain confidentiality, right? Is there a view where you can also follow the persona and the persona journey, or the digital persona journey, to identify what are the touch points, and then therefore design privacy or design privacy principles for the super app then?
Absolutely. I think it's basically, it's like there are multiple ways to achieve that. And I think the persona method that you actually identify is one of the best, right? So you identify, okay, like who actually needs access to the data and when they need access to the data and which system they need access to, right? And what are they going to do with their data? So once you actually have, for example, you have a customer persona, right? So in a customer persona, you want to make sure that his data is not basically being used needlessly for use cases that he has not given us consent for, right? So you want to make sure that that does not happen. So you create that persona where actually that data is sanctified for you, right? So you don't want anybody to manipulate that. You want to have like utmost confidentiality for that particular document, particular information, right? So, and also like when we think about the personas, we like, for example, you have data custodians like us, like who are basically like in charge of making sure that the confidentiality and integrity of the data is actually maintained. So we also have some permissions, right? So what actually, for that particular persona, so what happens is that we all also subjected to some guardrails, right? So we have some guardrails around which we cannot actually go out, all right? So we have access to data. Anybody who's an administrator on system can access their data, but what is important is to make sure that we actually do not allow free access to the data or unnecessary access to the data. So in that context, I think the persona model is actually like applicable to everything in security, right? And more so for privacy, right? So for privacy, it becomes like important because we can identify what are the requirements and what are the eventual objectives, basically which we need to define for a particular persona. So I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Fantastic. I think that's a great approach, approaching the whole super app security and privacy from a persona-based lens. Excellent. Homika, I know you had been giving us the looks. The time is up. Can we take a minute or two?
Yeah, sure, sir, sure,
Oh,
sure.
you're so nice. Thank you.
Okay, hello, thank you panelists, and hello Mr. Harshad. You mentioned a very important point about algorithms and the need to actually protect the algorithms as well. So how in today's day and age, how are people in the banking sector going about applying the concepts of security by design, as you rightly pointed out, to these algorithms, maybe AI ML algorithms as well? So what are the common practices today to secure?
I think I missed the last part, but I think what I understood is basically how to protect AI. Is my understanding correct?
Yes, how to protect the AI ML
Algorithms,
and apply the secure by design principles to the AI ML algorithms.
Yeah, first of all, we do a lot of presentation, right? In presentation, we talk about a lot of algorithms. I hope you all are agree, right? First thing is we need to, stop, doing this presentation part. I think if you have something, you need to, keep it in a common storage instead of sending it over email, because these presentations are easily transferred over email. Now you need to have email security, data at REST security. So many things and so many controls are very much required there. The first is basically all these algorithms need to be discussed with management, and it has to be in a more secured and more protected ways, in terms of not sharing a document per se, but sharing thoughts, keeping those thoughts in a within the confined group, protecting those documents, minutes of the meeting, because even today, most of the minutes of the meeting are just, written on the piece of paper and shared across legal and whatnot, audit and all those teams. So I think those confidentiality labeling has to happen. That is the first. So classification is one. Second is basically, as far as possible, minimize, using such data in a email or, in a communication way, because then there is a risk of getting this data leaked out. And third, in my opinion, is basically, as far as possible, these algorithms should be developed in-house instead of sending it to outsource. So if you outsource this, then there is a possibility that your algorithms can be easily copied.
Super.
Thank you.
I think the discussion can go on, but I'm just being conscious of the time this next session after this. I would have loved to get into authentication. I would have loved to get into anonymization or pseudonymization, but maybe let's leave that for the next FinSec. Homika, you want to conclude this?
Thank you. Thank you for a very interactive session. Thank you, Prashant sir, for making the session exceptionally engaging. Thank you.